The werewolf stared viciously at the frozen steak in front of it, baring its bloodthirsty fangs before biting down fiercely. The terrifying sight left the few people hiding behind the shelves too scared to breathe. But suddenly, a piercing sound immediately caught the werewolf's attention, and it started crawling towards the direction of the people, sniffing the air for the scent of soda. In a flash, the werewolf leaped to the front of the shelf with lightning speed. Although the people had already hidden elsewhere, the werewolf bared its teeth as if it had already caught the scent of humans. They had no choice but to split up and hide from the werewolf. Following the scent, the werewolf came to the fruit stand, skillfully climbing on top as it continued to search for food. The fresh scent of oranges greatly stimulated the werewolf's appetite. It was starving, drooling uncontrollably. Little did it know, Stein was hiding underneath the fruit stand. The werewolf's sharp claws were just above his head. Stein didn't dare to move, letting the werewolf's drool drip onto his forehead and then slide down his nose. Seeing the werewolf's saliva about to enter his mouth, Stein twitched all the muscles in his face but couldn't shake off the dirty, smelly drool. Just as Stein was about to be exposed, Zach, hiding nearby, quickly thought of a plan. He picked up a large ham and threw it far away. This successfully diverted the werewolf's attention. Despite distracting the werewolf, drool had reached Stein's mouth and he couldn't help but sneeze. Come on! Realizing the danger, they bolted. The werewolf finally saw its prey and, realizing it had been deceived, furiously chased after them. They ran as fast as they could, but how could two legs outrun four? Just as the werewolf was about to catch up, it pounced like a ravenous beast. Fortunately, Zach managed to grab a shelf and trip the werewolf, causing it to crash into a refrigerator. Seeing this, Stein initially laughed at the werewolf, but he immediately tripped and fell into a shopping cart. Zach didn't hesitate and pushed the shopping cart, running as fast as he could. The werewolf roared in anger, chasing them closely. The two made a sharp turn to evade the werewolf's attack. Before the werewolf could catch up, they finally escaped through the supermarket's back door and managed to lock the steel door behind them. They breathed a sigh of relief, feeling very pleased. Unexpectedly, in the next second, the werewolf kicked the half-meter thick steel door away. It was truly ferocious. The werewolf charged out, roaring twice before agilely leaping over the railing to continue its pursuit. Stein quickly led the others to the basement, only to find themselves rushing into a dead end. As they tried to turn back, the werewolf had already caught up, blocking their way. The werewolf extended its sharp claws, scraping them menacingly against the vehicle, then started walking towards them. Seeing the desperate humans, the werewolf grew incredibly excited. Unexpectedly, a car suddenly sped out, slamming the werewolf hard into a trash can. This left them all stunned. They had narrowly escaped danger, so where did this supernatural creature come from? As it turns out, Stein is a famous horror novelist. He possesses a magical typewriter. Any story written on it becomes reality. When a book is opened, the monsters that exist only within its pages descend into the real world. However, Stein, being a reclusive man, only created terrifying, bloodthirsty, and combative monsters. Thus, he had to lock the books to prevent the monsters from causing trouble. To keep this secret, Stein built an iron fence around his house and cut off contact with all his neighbors. Zach, who had just moved to town, noticed this strange neighbor. Stein always warned Zach not to interact with their family and strictly limited his daughter Hannah's activities. One night, while Zach was frowning over his homework, he suddenly heard arguing from the neighbor's house. He goes to the window and hears Hannah arguing and screaming with her father. Worried that Hannah was being abused, Zach didn't hesitate to rush out, intending to stop her deranged father.
What? I heard a scream. Is Hannah okay?
There was no scream. You didn't hear anything.
What are you talking about?
Get out of here or the last scream you'll ever hear will be your own.
No, wait.
So after their communication proved fruitless, Zach decided to call the police. However, when the police arrived, they found no sign of Hannah. Stein explained that he indeed had a daughter named Hannah, but she had gone abroad a long time ago. The screams Zach heard were merely from the surround sound system in the house, but Zach didn't buy Stein's story. When he returned home, he once again heard the sounds of Hannah arguing with her father. This reinforced Zach's belief that Hannah's father was a brute, and that he was actually harming his own daughter. However, this time, Zach didn't act rashly. Instead, he pretended to be a police officer and called Stein, asking him to come to the station. Then, Zach called his good friend Champ, and while Stein was away, they climbed over the fence and sneaked into Stein's house. In the basement, they saw the floor covered with bear traps. They couldn't understand why there were so many bear traps on the floor. They cautiously made their way through the basement and successfully entered the house, but after searching around, they couldn't find Hannah. However, on the second floor, they discovered a study filled with Goosebumps books. They casually picked one up, only to find that all the books were locked. Why lock up books? Was there something inside that needed to be hidden? Zach saw the key nearby and, without hesitation, picked it up and unlocked the book. At that moment, Hannah heard the noise and came into the study. Startled, Zach threw the book away. Before Zach could explain, something unexpected happened. The words from the novel seemed to come alive, transforming into ink that floated into the air, then converging into a black tornado that formed a giant hand emerging from the book. Soon after, a snowman that looked like King Kong completely broke free from its seal and entered the real world. However, the room was too low, making the snowman uncomfortable, and it nearly punched a hole through the ceiling. The chandelier only bumped its nose, but the snowman furiously smashed it to pieces. The three of them sat on the floor, too frightened to make a sound. Champ even thought about getting up and running away. Hannah was about to warn everyone to stay silent, but suddenly, the snowman let out a roar and charged toward Champ in a few swift strides. Luckily, Zach pushed Champ out of the way just in time. The snowman missed and crashed through the wall, disappearing into the night. Hannah knew she had made a huge mistake. Without explaining, she grabbed the book and ran after it. Zach and Champ followed closely behind. No one noticed another lock on a novel suddenly spring open. They followed the snowman's trail to the ice rink. Suddenly, countless jelly beans fell from above. They slowly looked up. The next second, the snowman descended from the top of a vending machine, casually eating the snacks in its hand, ignoring them. Seeing this, Zach and Champ pulled Hannah, trying to escape. That's when Hannah told them the monsters from the books were immortal. The only way to defeat them was to open the book and trap them back inside. Unexpectedly, the sound of Hannah unlocking the book immediately caught the snowman's attention. Just as Hannah was about to suck the snowman into the book, it slapped the book out of her hand. Hannah scrambled to her feet and ran toward the book. This enraged the snowman, who pounded the ground, causing Hannah to fall just short of the book. Seeing the snowman about to grab the book, Zach threw a hockey stick, knocking it away. The snowman, furious, chased after it as they hid behind the ice resurfacer. But when Zach looks up, he meets the snowman eye to eye. The snowman then swung its fist at them. Facing the snowman's attack, Zach and Hannah ran for their lives, sliding into a safety passage. Fortunately, the snowman wasn't very smart and knocked itself out by crashing into the glass door. They barely had a moment to breathe before the snowman woke up, more enraged than ever, and began ramming the glass. At this point, they had no way to escape. They could only wait like chickens to be caught. The snowman shattered the glass in no time. Just as it was about to choose its first victim, it suddenly withdrew its hands. Its massive hands started turning into ink, and a huge gash appeared in its abdomen. Behind the snowman, a man was casting a spell. It was Stein. He had picked up the novel and was sucking the snowman back in. Despite the snowman's desperate struggles, it was futile. With a final anguished scream, the snowman was sealed back into the book. After the crisis was averted, Stein glared at the three troublemakers, as if he could kill them with his eyes. On the way back, Zach and Champ learned that the author of the book was Stein, and all those locked books were his works. Once they opened the books, the various characters from the stories would appear. In the real world, they had to use the corresponding book to seal them back again. The snowman they had just encountered was the tamest one. Opening other books could lead to even more terrifying consequences. When they got home, they found that something even more dreadful had happened. The scariest puppet from the novel, Slappy the dummy, had also escaped. Unlike the other monsters, the sinister Slappy had a mind of its own. It was the smartest monster Stein had ever created, and it even had the ability to teleport. Slappy was the hardest to deal with. Stein could only try to distract Slappy and then cautiously reach for the novel on the floor, but Slappy had already seen through his plan. It instantly snatched the book that could seal it and burned it to ashes. There was now nothing that could imprison Slappy. Slappy then locked them in the house and took all the books from the shelves. It planned to release all the monsters to destroy the small human town. These adorable little dwarfs launched a deadly attack on the four humans. Despite their cute appearance, they have evil hearts. Seeing that their throwing knives missed the target, the dwarfs raised their weapons and began a fierce assault. Zach was nearly strangled to death. and the other companions were also beaten mercilessly by the dwarfs. Stein was even tied up tightly and nearly ended up in the oven to be roasted like a suckling pig. Fortunately, Zack grabbed a broom and shattered the dwarfs one by one. After a round, Zack successfully wiped out a whole squad of dwarfs. The remaining dwarfs were all thrown into the oven. In no time, the dwarfs were all reduced to clay. The four finally breathed a sigh of relief, but they relaxed too soon, as the monsters from the book are all immortal, and the dwarfs are no exception. A team of dwarfs regrouped and prepared to attack again. Not wanting to face immediate danger, they quickly retreated, luring the dwarfs into a trap-filled basement. One by one, the dwarfs stepped into animal traps on the ground, causing the team of dwarfs to collapse again. They finally took advantage of the chaos to escape, but Slappy was still outside, and they had to catch it quickly. Just as they hadn't gone far, they discovered a burning book on the road. It seems that while Slappy was opening the book to release monsters, it was also burning all the books. This way, the monsters could no longer be returned to the book and would become nearly invincible. At this moment, Slappy was driving a car and causing havoc along the way. It casually threw out a book, and a swarm of carnivorous plants appeared instantly. In a matter of seconds, a nearly 100-meter signal tower was crazily dismantled by the carnivorous plants. Soon, the disaster spread to the small town, and cries for help could be heard everywhere. No one knew how to stop it. The town's only 2 police officers were still chatting and laughing. The next second, Slappy charged in with alien soldiers. The alien soldiers activated their freeze guns, instantly turning the 2 officers into 2 ice sculptures staring at each other. 1 second it was just a cute little dog, and the next it revealed its terrifying side. When Stein and the others arrived, they were stunned. The entire town was in chaos, completely out of control, and everyone alive was turned into ice sculptures. Seeing everything before him, Stein fell into despair. Zack had a sudden idea. He suggested that Stein write a new book and put all the monsters into it, then suck them back into the novel world. Stein hesitated for a moment. Though it was a good idea, it was complicated to execute, because the book couldn't be written haphazardly. It had to be logical, with a plot and a twist. To write a magical novel, he needed his family's magical typewriter, and now that typewriter was stored in the school display case. It was indeed quite troublesome, but they had no other choice, so they hurriedly drove to the school. At this moment, the school was hosting a teacher-student carnival party, unaware of what was happening outside. The journey to the school was not smooth either. They encountered many monster attacks along the way, including a neurotic invisible man. Fortunately, he only liked playing pranks and didn't harm them. Then, a huge thing crawled out of the dirt, blocking their way. Massive green eyes suddenly drew close. It was a giant praying mantis with a gaping maw. Terrified, they screamed continuously, but it was of no use. It only enraged the mantis further. They realized that this mantis must be carnivorous, so they quickly turned the car around and sped away. Naturally, the mantis wouldn't let its prey escape. It chased after them wildly, crashing into buildings with a drifting maneuver. No one expected this mutant mantis to be so fast, completely catching them off guard. They had to floor the gas pedal to speed away. Unfortunately, they still underestimated the mantis's speed. It immediately took a shortcut and blocked their path. In the critical moment, Stein sharply turned the steering wheel to escape down another road. Despite several close calls, they couldn't avoid flipping the car. Unluckily, the mantis arrived and instantly tore the car apart. Fortunately, the 4 had already escaped and hid in a nearby supermarket. Seeing his beloved car turned into a toy for the monster, Stein was heartbroken. At this moment, Champ, exhausted from screaming, said he needed a soda to soothe his throat. Without hesitation, Stein handed him a bottle of soda. Originally, they planned to continue on to the school, but to their surprise, just after escaping the mantis's pursuit, they encountered a mutant werewolf. Luckily, the werewolf was busy gnawing on a steak and didn't notice them. Well, now they were spotted. The werewolf looked quite unique and sophisticated, wearing leggings and torn shoes. Thankfully, the 4 had already hidden. The hungry werewolf searched everywhere, climbing onto the fruit stand. Poor Stein had werewolf drool dripping on his forehead. As the drool was about to drip into his mouth, Zack threw a chicken leg to distract the werewolf, but a sneeze from Stein drew the werewolf back.
Come on!
They were chased once more. They had no choice but to run and run. After a thrilling escape, they managed to get out of the supermarket. However, the werewolf was incredibly agile, and even though they all made it outside, They couldn't shake it off. In a panic, they ran into a dead end. Just as the werewolf bared its fangs and prepared to pounce, Zach's Aunt Lorraine arrived, hitting the werewolf with her car and slamming it into a trash can. Although they escaped again, there was no time to rest. Zach urged his aunt to go to the police station for help and told her to meet them at the school. When Lorraine arrived at the police station, it had already been taken over by Slappy. Unsurprisingly, Lorraine was turned into an ice sculpture. Meanwhile, Zach and the others decided to take a shortcut to reach the school quickly. As they passed a creepy cemetery, the moonlight was hazy and enchanting. When Zach helped Hannah adjust her clothes, they exchanged a glance. At that moment, zombies began to emerge from the graves. They were soon being chased by a horde of zombies. Fortunately, Stein had written the zombies in his novel to be less bloodthirsty, allowing them to escape through the Iron Gate without harm. After many hardships, they finally reached the school. While Hannah and Champ went to find the typewriter, Zach questioned Stein. Zach asked why Hannah's body became ghostly and transparent when the moonlight hit her in the cemetery. He suspected that Hannah wasn't a real person, but a character from a novel. Stein revealed to Zach that Hannah wasn't his biological daughter but a character he created with a magical typewriter. He was too lonely and needed Hannah's companionship to fill the void of missing family. Hannah had always believed she was real. To Stein, Hannah was his real daughter. Meanwhile, Hannah found the magical typewriter, and they began to execute their plan. Stein went to a secluded place to start writing a new story. Zach and the others went to the dance party to inform everyone that the town had been overrun by monsters, urging them to organize and fight back. However, the students, lost in their revelry, didn't believe a word they said. A boy standing by the wall even mocked them mercilessly. Suddenly, the giant mantis broke through the wall and grabbed the boy. Everyone finally realized it was all true, and panic ensued. It turned out that Slappy had already gathered a large number of monsters outside the school, surrounding it. Their target was the author and the magical typewriter. Students ran around in terror, and Zach tried to calm them, explaining that those outside were monsters from Stein's books. He reassured them that the author himself was in the school, and as long as Stein finished the new book, he could trap all the monsters back inside it. He asked everyone to help hold off the monsters to buy Stein some time to complete his writing. Meanwhile, Slappy handed the keys to the dwarfs, instructing them to open the remaining books and release more monsters. Then, Slappy burned the books that had once trapped them. The newly freed monster army began to assemble. Slappy gave an evil speech, declaring that as long as they eliminated the author, they could do whatever they wanted and would never be sealed away again. With that, the monsters launched a frenzied attack on the school. This couple was stopped in their tracks by a werewolf. In a critical moment, the boyfriend, without a second thought, abandoned Taylor and ran away alone. The next second, the werewolf was in front of Taylor, baring its fangs. Taylor was terrified, her face turning pale. Not knowing what to do, the werewolf was inching closer and closer to Taylor. Just as it seemed Taylor was about to meet a grisly end, Champ bravely rushed forward. He leaped onto the werewolf's back and bit into its furry neck. Who was the real werewolf? In the end, Champ bit the werewolf so hard that it screamed in agony. The werewolf, never having experienced such an attack, howled in pain and fled. Taylor was stunned. How did Champ manage to do that? It turned out Champ had a lot of cavities, all filled with silver. Champ's courageous act won Taylor's heart. Although the werewolf was temporarily driven away, the school was already besieged by countless monsters. Under Slappy's command, hordes of zombies began gnawing at the iron fence. Tens of thousands of mutant flies were the first to fly in. Despite the teachers and students barricading all entrances with tables and chairs, they soon succumbed to the onslaught and were forced to flee in panic. The next moment, a robot with laser eyes blasted through the school's main gate. However, the monsters were too powerful, and the school quickly fell. At this moment, Stein, hiding in the basement, was frantically typing on his magical typewriter. But just as the novel was nearing its conclusion, the smartest monster from the book, Slappy, discovered Stein's hiding place. Slappy injured Stein's fingers, preventing him from continuing to write. At this critical juncture, Zach and Hannah arrived. Seeing he was outnumbered, Slappy had no choice but to temporarily retreat. Now, with the school completely overrun by monsters, they hurriedly took the magical typewriter and fled. As soon as they stepped out, they were blocked by man-eating plants bursting through the corridor walls on both sides. After a desperate struggle, they managed to lock the man-eating plants outside. At that moment, under the moonlight, Hannah's body once again became translucent and ethereal, but there was no time to dwell on this, as countless other monsters were closing in from the other side. They had to escape immediately. Just before the various monsters caught up to them, they successfully ran into the storage room with everyone else and barricaded the monsters outside. However, it was clear they couldn't stay there for long. For the safety of all the students and teachers, Stein decided to go out alone to draw the monsters away. Knowing he was the monster's primary target, Stein drove the school bus out of the school. Slappy noticed a school bus suddenly leaving and, as expected, stopped attacking the students. Under Slappy's orders, the monsters immediately gave chase. A giant mantis arrived first and with a swift attack, it overturned the bus. The Snowman and the werewolf immediately pounced on it, but what they didn't expect was that the driver was actually a dummy. It was just a trick by the rider. He had already moved to another school bus. As more and more monsters surrounded it, the creatures opened the bus door, triggering the bomb device. After a loud explosion, all the pursuing monsters were blown to pieces. However, Slappy, witnessing the entire scene, was not panicked at all, because the monsters originated from the book and could only be defeated with magic. Thus, all the monsters were resurrected. Stein and the others quickly drove to the amusement park. They took refuge in the haunted house, hoping to finish the new book there. The story was just 20,000 words away from completion, but Slappy quickly found them. Immediately, Slappy opened the last book, releasing the most terrifying monster besides himself, the giant slime. The group hurriedly fled the scene. Soon, the gelatinous monster engulfed the haunted house. Looking back at everything before him, Stein realized that Slappy was actually the dark side of his own mind. One side was fear, and the other was evil. Because Stein had been bullied since childhood, he became timid, reclusive, and afraid to interact with others. So, he turned to writing novels. He created a bunch of monsters, hoping to scare away those who bullied him. Slappy's current destructive actions were exactly the extreme thoughts Stein had as a child. Stein decided to confront Slappy directly. Stein handed the typewriter to Zach, asking Zach to finish the novel's ending while he stayed behind to stop the monster's spread and buy Zach more time to write. Then, thick gel spewed out, quickly enveloping Stein. Fortunately, Slappy wanted to torture Stein slowly and did not deliver a fatal blow. Zach and the others climbed to the top of the Ferris wheel and began writing non-stop. However, Slappy soon discovered that the typewriter was not with Stein, so he immediately commanded the monsters to attack Zach and the others. The monsters swarmed up and began climbing the Ferris wheel. In the last second before the Ferris wheel fell, Zach finally finished typing the novel's conclusion.
Never to be seen again. The end.
Suddenly, a mantis lunged, causing the Ferris wheel to collapse, rolling forward like a wheel. Luckily, the Ferris wheel eventually stopped, and they were all safe. Seeing that the monsters would soon catch up, Zach suddenly remembered that Hannah also came out of a novel, and if he opened that book, Hannah would disappear as well. Hannah was well aware of this, since her character in the novel was 18 years old. Her age in reality would never change. She would always be 18. She was more sensitive to this flaw than anyone else. While they were arguing, all the monsters caught up. In the critical moment, Zach couldn't bring himself to do it. Seeing this, Hannah decisively grabbed the novel and threw it out. The gate to the novel world reopened. A dazzling holy light shot into the sky. The weather changed in an instant, and all the monsters were gradually sucked back into the book.
See you in your dreams!
Zach tightly embraced the soon-to-disappear Hannah, sharing an emotional goodbye, and then Hannah was sealed away. Zach's heart felt like it was being torn apart, but he was powerless. Champ rushed up and closed the book. The great turmoil finally came to an end. After this adventure, Stein corrected his mistakes. He no longer poured his emotions into creating monsters and instead went to Zach's school to teach, starting a new life. Although Zach returned to school, he still missed Hannah. Unexpectedly, Stein brought Zach a big surprise. Stein rewrote a book, and the real Hannah appeared in front of Zach again. Hannah and Zach could now live a happy life together.
You!